Welcome back to Combating Procrastination. In part 4, we're going to look at procrastination thinking. So let's take a look at what we know about procrastination thinking for a start. Folly of Procrastination, the book tells the tale of two schoolboys, Edward and Charles Martin. One procrastinated, the other didn't. Edward started his homework early and he finished early. Charles marched to a different drummer. He put his books aside and told himself, "Oh, there's enough time. I'll learn my lessons this evening." Then he started to play. When evening came, he felt sleepy and told himself, "Oh, I can learn my lessons before school in the morning." And then, of course, when morning came, Charles put it off again. Now, as the clock wore down, Charles sketched out a few quick answers and rushed off to school. Well, The Folly of Procrastination was published in 1848. Times change, but procrastination remains the same. In this part of our Combating Procrastination series, we'll explore procrastination thinking and examine some solutions. I'll give you a psychological homework assignment at the end for procrastination thinking correction. Well, what is procrastination thinking? Well, this is a cognitive distortion that ranges from later is better thinking to a foreclosure on change. This automatic thinking style consists of prompting, justifying, explaining, or excusing needless delays. These deceptions may surface in response to perceiving an uncomfortable or unpleasant task. They may be an expression of false optimism, such as believing that you'll have an easier time doing something later that you find difficult doing today. If you believe you won't succeed at the level that you think you should, procrastination thinking can reflect a false pessimism leading to half-hearted efforts or long-term delays. This can have a pernicious effect on your reputation as well as the quality of your life. If you don't understand the power of procrastination thinking, you could go down the wrong track with a train heading your way. Once you recognize your automatic procrastination thinking patterns, you are in a position to get back on the right track by disengaging from them. So first, let's look at primary and secondary examples of procrastination thinking. Primary procrastination is putting off work that you find inconvenient or you just don't want to do. You don't feel like mowing the lawn, so in knee-jerk fashion you head towards the TV as you tell yourself you'll cut the lawn later. Eventually the grass grows higher than what you can conveniently cut. After squabbling with your maid over what the neighbors might think about the hayfield in the front of your house, you eventually hire someone to cut it. Secondary procrastination is putting something off because of a pre-existing problem such as self-doubts and excessive worry over failure. For example, physics is a required course. You feel intimidated by the subject. You both put off taking the course and addressing your doubts and fears. You may actually tell yourself something like, "I can't do it." But more likely this is the case of, "I won't do it," because it's too worrisome, too scary, and whatever the reasons may be. Now let's next look at some forms of procrastination thinking that can fit into either category and antidotes to bring about a transformation from procrastination to positive actions. The primary and secondary forms of procrastination show basic examples of tomorrow or mañana thinking that can have more twists and turns than a mountain road. Thoughts like "I need to let the idea simmer longer," or "I'll get to it after I take a nap and feel rested," are red flags for mañana thinking. Once you see the flag, you know that a procrastination trap is near, and you can avoid this kind of needless danger. Taking a nap may be a good idea if you're truly fatigued and can't concentrate. This need for a nap gets suspicious when, if before you snooze, you hear your phone ring and you perk up hearing the voice of a friend. Perhaps your fatigue comes from the thought of doing a disliked priority. It's also suspicious when you find another excuse to delay after arising from your nap. You could break a clock, but time keeps running. Mary Todd Lincoln understood this thinking and expressed it this way: "My evil genius procrastination has whispered me to tarry till a more convenient season." The actor-singer Dean Martin also captured the spirit of this later thinking in the song Mañana. Martin sang about a broken window, dripping faucet, a vehicle broken down, and other things he left unfixed because of procrastinating. He repeated a stanza that mañana was good enough for him, but is it good enough for you? Mañana, mañana, mañana is good enough for me. If not, the time has come to think about how procrastination muddles your awareness and abilities to get priority things done. Awareness techniques can help promote a realistic perspective of what's going on psychologically. Action techniques are catalysts for corrective actions. So here are 3 techniques to start off with that you can use to avoid the extra price of mañana thinking. Let's start with a translation technique. Although thoughts don't have to include words, nevertheless you can translate procrastination thinking into written words. This translation can give you a clear view of what's going on. And once you can see what's going on, you're in a position to do something about it. One thing you can do is label procrastination thinking for what it is. So this is a label technique. To label later ideas as procrastination thinking. You now know what to target for change. You may also tell yourself that this later illusion is BS, but you're still going to have to work on uprooting the thinking, and you might do so with a interference technique. This is where you introduce a self-questioning and change into the procrastination thinking process. You ask yourself how later is better. Seems like a simple question, but it could have pretty profound answers. So honestly ask and answer this question, and you may quickly see the fallacy in later thinking delaying. You're now in a position to exercise a productive choice over doing or delaying, and that's your action component. The manana trap can be elaborate, but there is no end to the creative things people can do to justify delaying even the most pressing of activities. For example, you make your priority task dependent upon doing something else. Then you put off the contingency activity. That's a red flag for contingency manana procrastination thinking. Contingency manana thinking is making one action depend upon doing something else first, and then, of course, you put off the contingency. For example, you want to meet new friends, but you decide you have to lose 20 pounds first. Then you put off losing the weight because you feel too stressed to diet. Losing weight becomes a contingency for making friends, and feeling less stressed becomes a contingency for doing both. So you can see where that type of thinking is going to get you. Let's say you want to overcome procrastination. You tell yourself that the experts have to tell you how to put a fire under yourself before you can do anything about stopping your procrastinating. That, of course, is a crock. This is the same type of conditional procrastination ploy used by the characters in Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot. They hang around waiting for this character, but Godot is a no-show. The contingency manana diversion obviously wastes time with needless conditional distractions. This ploy is like waiting in a swamp. The swamp may be rich with life beneath your feet. It's also picketed with dead trees. Use watching dead trees as your guide for exiting the swamp, and this is like the contingency manana ploy. While your attention is fixed on dead wood thinking, you won't see the path out of the swamp. But once you get on a path of purposeful production, you may find many exciting things to see and experience in the swamp and elsewhere. So instead of waiting or praying for a miracle, look at why you concoct contingencies for delaying at the same time that you exercise your do-it-now plan. So here's a brief awareness and action perspective building exercise that can help. It consists of stating your contingency manana condition, question it, answer the question, and engage the action right away. For example, here's a condition. You tell yourself, I'll deal with my job stresses after I research how to get a job. Then you put off doing the research. Well, here's a sample question. How does setting up a contingency for action help me deal with my job stress and job search? Here's a sample answer. I can address both the research and stress simultaneously without using either as an excuse to delay. And here's a sample action. You focus on a job opportunity, research the target organization, and submit your application. And of course, all this is easy, providing you don't procrastinate. The backward ploy is a dwelling in the past distraction that overlaps with the contingency manana ploy. You tell yourself that before defeating procrastination, you need to know how you came to procrastinate first. Otherwise, you're doomed to repeat the pattern. Well, that sounds reasonable, but is it realistic? The backward ploy has the surface appearance of seeking deep answers to profound questions about yourself, yet it often serves the same purpose as other contingency manana ploys. For example, to overcome procrastinating, you think you must have a classic psychoanalysis by a small bearded man with an Austrian accent. Of course, there's no compelling evidence that demonstrates that this type of archaeological expedition through incomplete and biased memories will bring about an end to procrastination. Meanwhile, you have a perfect excuse to procrastinate until your analysis is complete. It may take 10 years or more, and you're off the hook until then, but are you really? Dwelling on the past is a procrastination thinking red flag. For example, concentrate on past mistakes and hurts, and you may feel too immobilized to attend to today's challenges. While absorbed in this distraction, you can create problems for yourself today that you may very well regret tomorrow. Therefore, this vicious cycle tends to perpetuate itself. You're likely to learn a lot more about yourself through the productive actions that you take. Here's an awareness and action technique for rejecting backward ploy procrastination thinking and getting on with a purposeful and productive life that can be your best self-learning experience ever. As to the awareness exercise, ask yourself this question. Where's the evidence that dwelling on the past helps you in the present moment and prepares you for a better future? If there's no meaningful evidence, start learning about yourself by taking on meaningful challenges. Now here's a future action exercise that complements the awareness exercise. You can shift gears by a flip technique. Here you mentally play with changing perspectives from the past to the future. In this shift, you ask, what is the most important thing that I want to accomplish for myself that I can stretch to do today? Assuming you can accomplish the desired result, add these dimensions to your futuristic thinking. 1. Articulate your meaningful goal and make it measurable and achievable. Then create a doable plan for this transformational change. Execute your plan. Make adjustments. Repeat this test process until you transform your actions from passive regurgitations of past problems to a forward-learning, problem-solving focus where you learn a lot about yourself and get a lot done that you think is important for you to accomplish. Backward ploys can connect to parasitic fears and anxieties that can connect to the could-have-been syndrome. Parasitic fears are exaggerated ego dangers that drain time and resources and give back nothing of useful value. An ego danger can be something like thinking that if you take a test and fail, that would be horrible and people would remember that 20 years from now. And because of this type of anxiety, what you do is you avoid taking a test, for example, that might lead you to an opportunity for a job promotion or entry into a school or whatever it may be. Secondary procrastination often shadows these fears, and so you get less done because of the fear and because of the procrastination. If you're flush with parasitic fears, a trail of could-have-beens is likely to follow you. If you weren't afraid of heights, you could have learned to fly. If you weren't afraid of interviewing, you could have gotten a great job. As you dwell on what could have been, you may drift from what you can do now. That's your red flag. However, there's a silver lining here. Could-have-beens point to what you still may do. Well, by acting to curb your parasitic fears, you learn to tolerate tension, defeat your fears, get meaningful things done. You also can beat the procrastination that accompanies them. In fact, if by addressing procrastination that accompanies them, you get a two for benefit. You're likely to get rid of the fear and the procrastination at the same time. For an awareness-building exercise, let's take some advice from the past. The 1st century AD Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius said, "Your past is gone. Your future is uncertain." If you take this message to heart, you know you cannot change the past, but you also know that the corrective actions that you take today can help shape a positive future. As to an action technique, well, what you could have done and didn't do and all that sort of stuff is a counterfactual. Counterfactuals are thoughts about what could have been had you acted differently. Some are associated with higher levels of procrastination, and that's understandable. Well, here's the bottom line idea. You acted as you did, and to think otherwise is contrary to the facts. You can turn this counterfactual thinking, however, into corrective actions. Use what you learned from a past delay to act in a timely way, for example, for what you can undertake today. What do you want to do and accomplish that is similar to what you once left by the wayside? What steps could you now take to improve? When will you take them? How will you measure the results? How will you know when to adjust the plan? Knowing when to adjust the plan logically follows taking the action. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a prediction that directly or indirectly brings about itself. Self-fulfilling prophecies were known at least as far back as ancient Greece. More recently, Harvard professor Robert Merton named them and noted that they may have unanticipated consequences. You believe that you don't know where to start a project, and then don't start it, thus fulfilling a negative prophecy. You believe you need an MBA to get a desired promotion, but don't think you're smart enough. Thus, you put off trying to get the MBA and quit trying for the promotion. That creates its own self-fulfilling prophecy. So whenever you set up negative views of what you can't do, you have a negative self-fulfilling prophecy red flag just before you. Now, self-handicapping is a variation on the self-fulfilling prophecy theme. You avoid effort and rationalize your avoidance by picturing yourself as a person blocked by negative conditions. You consciously or unconsciously impose these gratuitous obstacles upon yourself and they can include telling yourself that you are too anxious, tired, or distracted to perform well. With these prepackaged excuses in mind, procrastination is not far behind. Now, an antidote is to create new and productive self-fulfilling prophecies. One awareness technique is backward planning. You can initiate backward planning by imagining reaching your goal and performing well. Then you look back at what you did just before you succeeded, then the step before that, and the one before that, until you get back to your initial step. In this case, the action component of our awareness action program involves proactive movement that draws from backward planning. You start at the beginning of your plan, now that you've worked it out, and you work forward, and then you see what happens. Catch-22 procrastination is foreclosing on yourself by setting impossible conditions for success. Then you procrastinate to avoid the conditions and degrade any exceptions to the rules or your expected results. You consistently sabotage yourself when you have an opportunity to transform your thinking from foreclosure to experimental. Foreclose on yourself, and this is a red flag. This is like going over a bridge to nowhere to get to a road to nowhere. In the 2011 annual American Psychological Association Stress in America survey, many respondents report that they would deal with their stress if they had the will, but they can't because they lack the will. That's catch-22. An unkept man with bad breath wants a beautiful model for a mate, but rejects any model interested in him. He follows the Groucho Marx line that he wouldn't want to be a member of any club that would accept him. Meanwhile, he rejects any mortal woman who is not a beauty queen, as she can't be good enough for him. If a beauty queen showed an interest in him, this must mean something is wrong with her. The man's fundamental problem is procrastinating on developing a healthy self-concept and resolving intimacy and perfectionism conflicts. In this case, if he cleaned himself up and brushed his teeth and made a major attitude adjustment, he might sidestep his catch-22 ploy. However, this would take an effort and create a clash between the I he knows and a life that is incongruous with his self-fulfilling prophecy and self-handicapping ideas. As an aside, some people have a morbid fear of upsetting their own apple cart of irrational ideas. This may be the result of a subjective fear of feeling unfamiliar with accomplishment and uneasiness about taking responsibility and responsible action for personal development and growth through self-improvement efforts. Now, fittingly, a willpower paradox exercise can be useful in helping to unravel some of the complications of catch-22 thinking. For example, think you lack the willpower to stop procrastinating, and you have found a procrastination paradox. That paradox merits review and resolution. For example, you want one thing and you do something different. That's willful. How do you resolve this willpower paradox? Second exercise is our action willpower exercise. You exercise willpower, or free will, when you choose a constructive action over procrastination action. This free will effort involves restricting yourself from procrastinating. As your procrastination paradox exercise, refuse to procrastinate and see what results. Activity is a remedy for depression, and so it's fashionable to look at behavioral antidotes. In Dante's Inferno, the restitution for acedia, which is depression, was to run in circles in purgatory while shouting positive affirmations. Exercise, of course, is an evidence-based antidepressive technique. It works as well as any other. Shouting is an activity and a form of remedy. Positive affirmation, well, that intuitive view may not help. Dante's solution may not be sufficient by itself. When depressed, you're looking at a barren world from a dark place. In a state of painful solitude, you're more likely to feel intolerant towards tension and to procrastinate. Thus, getting to the point where you exercise, well, that's a horse of a different color. If you are like many, you'll stall on getting going and using activity as a remedy by thinking you're powerless to act. That's a red flag. It's also a red herring. A red herring is a distraction that diverts attention from the central issue. Powerless thinking, for example, is both a red herring and a fallacy. It distracts from the things that you can do. If you're burdened by this thinking, you can just wave the white flag and you may not get very far at all. However, you can practically always find something that you can do to exercise self-control and to think more clearly. A phrase that you might hear echoing through your mind could be a phrase, I can't. I can't may signal a form of red herring powerless thinking that contributes to feelings of negative resignation. When you feel depressed, telling yourself that you're powerless to sharpen a pencil is a belief and not a fact, and yet many people who are depressed treat the belief as though it were a fact. If you believe that you have no hope, pessimism, excuses, procrastinating, and supports a self-fulfilling prophecy where you show yourself that you don't change because you think you can't change. That's also catch-22 thinking. So, how do you combat this discordant ensemble? Well, you can start with the impossibility intervention. Instead of saying, I can't, substitute the words, it's impossible for me. With this phrase, bring about a different perspective. For example, it's impossible for me to sharpen a pencil. It's impossible for me to stop feeling anxious or depressed. It's impossible for me to stop drinking. Really? Create a contrasting conditions. Are these actions as impossible as throwing a giant sequoia into space? Or are you basically saying it's difficult and challenging? And that's quite a different way of looking at things from the standpoint of what you can do to change as opposed to what you can't do to change. The second one is a first step intervention. And this is somewhat of an ancient idea, and here the journey of 1,000 miles begins where you stand. This is from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, and it's been around for, as I say, over 1,000 years. Here's the message. It's up to you to take the first step. Go ahead. Take it. The Wheedler is a finagling, emotionally driven inner con artist that lurks in the shadows of your mind and pulls the strings of your thoughts in order to gain immediate gratification regardless of the cost. Listen, you can hear the saboteur when you're at odds with yourself and losing weight, kicking an addictive habit, or combating procrastination. You're on a diet, and you hear your Wheedler say, if I don't have that extra slice of Bavarian chocolate cake, I'll die. Tomorrow I'll be good forever. Yeah, sure. This hyperbolizing and discounting argument rarely holds water. You'll shortly be packing in more sweet and fattening carbs. That's just the way it works when you're moving through the world of the Wheedler. A whining Wheedler pleads, oh, life should be convenient and easy. It's awful when it's not. Albert Ellis might see this voice as arising from low frustration tolerance. This is an area that you had better deal with if you want to stop whining, feel in command of yourself, and overcome this form of secondary procrastination that shadows this thinking. Wheedler thinking, of course, is a red flag situation. It's also another red herring. How do you beat the Wheedler? Well, you can start with Wheedler imagery. Which of these pictures that you see on the screen do you think best paints your string-pulling Wheedler that presses you to tarry longer on your responsibilities while you go for the gusto or for what is easiest now? Of course, you can cast your vote for more than one because there's more than one type of voice the Wheedler embraces. So keep this image in mind and then use the following idea to put the Wheedler on the run. Here you do a Wheedler thought analysis. When you're tempted to do something self-defeating, what excuses or rationalizations do you give yourself? Do you deny consequences? If so, you're hearing your Wheedler voice. Now give that voice a negative image. Then do a Wheedler analysis. In your Wheedler analysis, if you normally take Wheedler logic for granted, ask yourself, how has that worked out for me? If you are like most, your answer is not very well at all. So what has not worked before is not likely to work now. Here's a flip technique idea. Rather than try to quash Wheedler thinking by decree, such as banishing Wheedlers, running around in circles and saying Wheedler no more or whatever it may be, accept the Wheedler as a natural but self-sabotaging habit. Now simultaneously give yourself instructions for following through on what is healthy for you to do. Then act as if you could follow this new proactive prescription. Don't be surprised if your Wheedler goes into hiding while awaiting a better time to spring to life again. Reactance is a resistance to a perceived loss of privilege or freedom, such as restrictions on your First Amendment rights or your ability to get books from your library. Most would fight to keep or restore such rights and privileges. In fact, people have been willing to put their lives on the line to preserve their freedoms. Reactance, unfortunately, has a dark side that propels a phony rebelliousness and fosters procrastination. This is a red flag signal that you need to look deeper at your motives and intentions. It's also an example of a red herring. For example, deadlines are often interfere with other things that you'd prefer to do. Reactance comes into play when you delay meeting the deadline because you think that artificial timelines interfere with your freedom to do as you please. You may justify your delaying by telling yourself something like, this is a waste of my time, I shouldn't have to do it, Well, tell that to a police officer who pulls you over because you put off getting your car inspected because you thought it was a waste of time. Reactance procrastination surfaces among those who are addicted to a substance. You believe you have a right to drink until drunk. This thinking can dominate your way of being. However, you're screwing yourself up with this self-sabotaging intellectual game. You know you need to kick an addictive habit. The loss of your driver's license and other unpleasant consequences have made this amply clear. Still, you hate to deprive yourself of anything. You hear your angry and defiant wheedler say, "The hell with this, I'm going for a drink." Some advertisers understand the power of reactance and set the stage for strengthening wheedler thinking in order to dupe you. In the early 2000s, Budweiser critter advertisements, you see lizards, frogs, and an alligator raiding a waterside bar and coming out with a case of Budweiser beer. The message was clear. The critters intended to drink now. No one could stop them from getting their bud. Budweiser's water and reptile bar scene had the power to trigger primitive consumptive urges among those vulnerable to these urges. This imagery also shows up in Rorschach inkblot tests, responses of people addicted to alcohol. Did Budweiser advertisers know about the Rorschach results? Did they understand and manipulatively use the concept of reactance? Well, perhaps you'd be wise to resist brainwashing and freedom-robbing hype of this sort. But how? Well, regardless of whether reactance procrastination is about resisting kicking an addiction or dragging your feet on meeting deadlines, there's a simple technique to put this state into perspective. With a clear perspective, you are less likely to embrace procrastination with a factious right to repeat painful, self-defeating patterns. So if you suspect you are in a reactance procrastination trap, do a cost-benefits analysis. Match the probable results of caving into short-term impulses and that of restricting what you do for the sake of long-term hedonism. I'll use drinking as an example. Ask yourself, what do I gain in the short term by indulging, say, my right to drink until drunk? What are the long-term results of indulging this perceived right? Then ask yourself, what do I gain by abstaining now, and what's likely to result from long-term abstinence? If you decide you're giving up a phony privilege, then what action steps can you take to act more like a long-term hedonist? For example, is it possible for you to join a Smart Recovery group or go online at smartrecovery.org and work on overcoming your problem habit? The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote, "Above all, don't lie to yourself." The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point where he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. The excuses that you make to yourself to delay are normally different from the ones that you give others to justify your delays. Both lack veracity. They are also classic red flags and red herrings. Let's say that your wheedler goes into high gear and cons you into thinking that you can perform later because you're too tired or anxious today. Well, tomorrow comes and you keep using lame excuses to delay. Finally, time runs out. To save face, avoid blame, and stay in someone else's good grace, you shift gears and make a palatable excuse. You explain your way to your delays by saying, "I was sick, the computer crashed, or there was a family emergency." Of course, you can also use the artificial obstacles that you placed in your own path originally to explain your delays to others. "I was too tired to concentrate" is an excuse with a double purpose. Con yourself, you con others. Are your excuses for procrastinating the same as lies? Sure they are. Most people won't buy them, but let you slide. On the other hand, you may still lose face. If you're tired of your procrastination thinking deceptions, try a different way. Sometimes you need to take a step back to see what's happening. So, as an awareness exercise, get straight with yourself. Do a procrastination log where you track what you do when you procrastinate. Listen to yourself and target the nonsense that you tell yourself. Also listen to the nonsense you feed to others to get yourself off the hook for procrastinating. You're likely to see patterns in your procrastination thinking, emotions, and behaviors through the log. Now, rewrite the script. Use your logged information and use it to create a new narrative for yourself where you fulfill your responsibilities to yourself and to others. You'll have less to lie about if you don't procrastinate on taking this step. Well, here's a bonus idea to avoid excuse making. Take on only those things that you're required to do and do them first and do them well. Others may want you to squeeze in their project, unless there is reciprocity or you owe them favors. A good way to avoid procrastination is saying no when you have the discretion to do so. Of course, exercise common sense. Part of the puzzle for making transformational changes from procrastinating to higher levels of efficiency and effectiveness lies in knowing what takes place in the time and space for what, when, and where you procrastinate. What happens when you have a first urge to delay? At what point do you start to follow through? And when do you finish? What goes on in between? At any time, you can recognize and act to diffuse procrastination thinking and actodinate. This is to act today to start and complete a measurable increment of a timely and relevant priority activity. Let's turn to an abbreviated but novel form of New York psychologist Albert Ellis's famous ABCDE system that you can use to combat procrastination thinking and actodinate. The novel approach includes matching procrastination thinking against standards for reasonable thinking. By using this approach, you can expose the fallacies in procrastination thinking. It's also easier to refuse guidance by cognitive distortions when you can see them for what they are. To start, let's see what the ABCDE acronym stands for. A stands for what you see as an adverse event. For example, you have a challenging project to finish before a deadline. B refers to what you believe about either the project or the deadline. For example, you tell yourself you don't want to do it now, and so you'll do it later. C refers to the emotional and behavioral consequences that are the byproduct of a belief about an unpleasant upcoming responsibility. For example, you feel anxious and tense at the thought of doing the project. You divert into a safer activity. Your anxiety continues and your delay results in a reprimand. D stands for disputing procrastination thinking and replacing these thoughts with fact-based rival beliefs. E is a socially and personally desirable effect on questioning, challenging, and disputing procrastination thinking. I'll walk you through the paces with an example. Let's start with adversity, or activating event. This is the project with a deadline you've yet to begin. Possible procrastination thoughts or beliefs. I have plenty of time. I'll get to it later. Emotional and behavioral consequences that extend from procrastination thinking ordinarily include stress, may include a 11th hour rush, excuse making, and sometimes you get hammered for lateness. Most of us feel uncomfortable about having a priority task hanging over our heads to begin with and doing nothing about it. Stress is an emotional consequence. Rush work may be a slipshot, and you may tarnish your image and lose future opportunities. Disputation can help you adjust your thinking and create productive new thoughts that can be catalysts for effective actions. Disputation is a process of verifying and correcting procrastination thinking. By questioning procrastination thinking, you can help make this thinking less automatic and stop following later is better fallacies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a different element. We'll set up 6 criteria for sensible thinking and look at some straight answers to those questions, and then we'll look at do-it-now alternatives. First, does later thinking, 1, fit with reality? Straight answer to that question is later thinking is self-deceptive and blocks positive performance. A do-it-now strategy, which could be offshoot of the straight answer, is I can define this as a self-development activity and make a non-failure approach to starting and working through the project. The second criteria to match against the question of later thinking is, does this thinking support positive performance? Well, the straight answer is results speak for themselves. They do little to result in anything constructive, and you may very well end up languishing in misery if the cards go against you. A do-it-now strategy that flows from the answer is, I can organize my action around setting a time to stick with my project and refuse to go off in tangents. The third criteria for positive thinking to dispute later thinking is, does this thinking support positive actions? A reasonable answer is delays that continue to affect other people will likely put people off, as well as reduce my chances for accomplishing some of the things that I think are important. Do-it-now strategy that flows from this is this idea. I'm likely to get favorable performance reviews and salary increases by timely work submissions. If you're a student in school, you're likely to get better grades. If credibility is important to you, you're likely to find that your neighbors and friends and others who count on your timeliness tend to view you as more of a doer than a stewer, and that's a better place to be. The fourth criteria for assessing later thinking is, does this thinking allow for a broad range of emotions? An answer that's reasonable is, when I delay, I feel pressured and stressed. Obviously, it doesn't in most instances. And a do-it-now strategy that can flow from this is, while I can't command stress to stop, I can focus on what I can control, which is questioning this thinking, engaging in purposeful actions, and so on. Fifth question to match against later thinking is, does it promote healthy lifestyle habits? A reasonable answer is, dodging discomfort and making tomorrow promises is non-productive. So that the answer is usually no to that question. A do-it-now strategy that flows from the answer is corrective actions involve breaking the activity down into what I can do first, second, third, and fourth. So what you're doing instead of ducking and dodging is you're engaging by taking a bits and pieces approach and working at each part and chipping away at it until you get done what you need to finish. Sixth standard to match against later thinking is, does this thinking lead to openness to experience and flexibility? A reasonable answer is later thinking typically leads to entrapment, being in a rut where you spin your wheels and get nowhere fast. A do-it-now strategy that flows from the answer is I can choose to correct this thinking. I can look at its results, control what I can do to produce a different outcome. So you have 6 standards, 6 questions that come about as a result of the standards, 6 answers, and 6 do-it-now strategies. So you can take this model, you can apply it again and again to different situations in which you procrastinate, and where procrastination thinking is influential in what you do or what you don't do. Following this model, you're going to produce effects, and positive new effects are likely to come about from what you did to interfere with procrastination thinking and to start thinking straight about the project, but also to do something about the project. So it's not good enough just simply to think about your thinking, but also to take what you learned from this assessment and turn it into something that's productive. Procrastination is not going to go away right away. Practice combating procrastination thinking, though, and you can gain dividends in the form of increases in your personal effectiveness. But you also get a hidden benefit. The brain is adaptable and capable of developing rich new neural networks associated with the development of reasoning and critical thinking skills, for example. In a sense, it's like a muscle. When you confront procrastination thinking as it occurs, you are helping yourself build mental muscle. The results of this practice are cumulative. The gains you make through each act of persistence are like drops in a bucket that slowly fills. Eventually, you reach a critical mass where you can routinely recognize and overcome procrastinating thinking and follow through with productive actions, and where ectodonating becomes your usual way of life. So where are we going in the next 2 parts? In parts 4, 5, and 6, you have a 3-pronged cognitive, emotive, and behavioral program that applies to reducing negatives, as procrastination is one, and advancing your positive choices and purposes. Indeed, reducing a needless negative, such as procrastination, is also very positive. You've just seen the first of these 3 prongs. Here are the next 2. In part 5, you'll learn how to harness your emotions. You'll learn how to build emotional tolerance and stamina to tough your way through uncomfortable circumstances. Many avoid this step, and that's why procrastination is so often self-perpetuating. In part 6, you'll learn behavioral techniques to follow through, avoid the hassles of missing deadlines, and prospering through accomplishments. I'll introduce a simple concept for guiding purposeful and productive behavioral transformations in that section.